Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Vincent, who's an intermediate photographer from the Netherlands. Vincent says he shot this in Italy. It's a misty morning sunrise shot. Vincent was using a Nikon D200 with a Nikon 80-400 VR zoom lens at 230 millimeters and at ISO 200 stop down to f5.3 and exposed the file for a 1600th of a second. The D200 is a crop factor camera, and so after the crop factor, this 230 millimeter shot becomes a very long shot, somewhere between 350 millimeters and 400 millimeters. And I love what the long lens is doing here in terms of creating this illusion that these ridges are much closer together. It's really the repetition of these ridges sort of stacked up on each other that's the major visual design element of the image. Obviously there's a really beautiful dramatic quality of light, the way the low clouds, fog, mist, whatever that is, the way it's carrying the backside light in the early morning is creating a very dreamy effect, very dramatic. And something else that I want to mention in today's critique is, for me as the viewer, how powerful these other elements of story are. The power line and the power poles, and it's hard to see what this is. You're thinking it's a dust spot. The reason that it's in the image is that it's a bird, and in a bigger print you'd really get a sense of that. And you can really sort of think about it like this. This is one of the points I wanted to make today. If you shoot this shot without these other elements, it's almost sort of like creating a beautiful stage for the viewer, but then never having any actors or any elements of story. So you have this incredible setting for a story to happen. Here it's the quality of light and the ridges, but then there are not any other elements of story, and it's sort of not enough for the viewer to engage. And it's just a real powerful thing to think about when you're shooting a shot, sort of asking yourself the question, is there enough of an anchoring idea? Is there enough of a leading line? Is there enough of a path? Is there enough of suggestion of getting from one place to the other to actually be telling a story to the viewer? I mean, when we're photographing people, those kinds of things can become a lot more obvious to work with. But in landscape shots, we can sort of forget that we're storytellers, and we have more elements of story that can engage the viewer at multiple levels of reality. Images start to have a lot bigger impact. And you know, the power lines are a great example of a subject where the reaction may be very different from one viewer to the other. One viewer may look and think, you know, I wish that it wasn't there. Man's impact on this environment is negative. Someone else might think about communication. There may be some nostalgic thought of communicating to someone. In either case, these types of subjects, to me, make images like this a lot more powerful. When I start to think about perfect world improvement for this image, one of the things that I'd like to do is create a variation on this image where there's more depth. You know, one of the things Vincent mentioned in his submission form was that he was going for sort of a peaceful serenity, and I think he's achieved that here to great effect. And so flattening things out, I think, goes with sort of his directive. But I wanted to work with this image today and take it in another direction and create an image that has a little bit more form. For me, the image is flattened out for two reasons. One is just the fact that we really don't have a black point or a white point. So in sort of a global way and in a local way, there's not a lot of dramatic contrast here. And the other thing that's happened is that you have a real strong sense of one color, this sort of burnt yellow. It's everywhere in the image. And from a color theory standpoint, it's the difference between warm and cool that creates the illusion for the viewer of moving through from something that's nearer to further away and so on and so forth. And for me, this real heavy overlay of the one note burnt yellow kind of pushes me out of the image and just kind of keeps me in this two-dimensional headspace as I look at the image. If I take this to black and white and get the color out, then I can start to really lean on the idea of value, the difference between highlight and shadow, to start to create a lot more of a feeling of being able to move through the image. So, you know, the very first thing that I did here was just use the green channel, a pretty flat channel in black and white in this particular image, as a starting point to do this work of creating more form. We're going to skip this layer for a second and come back to it. And really all I've done here now, and I'll go through pretty quickly, is just a whole series of levels and curves adjustments to try and do the thing that I've already talked about, which is more local contrast, to create more of a feeling of depth as we're moving through the image. and then I made a big dramatic change to the top part of the image. I made this much darker, added a lot of form, and then made the top a lot darker to try and create a visual stop. Right now this flattens out and really starts to pull me out of the image, and I feel like the image is a little bit out of balance from top to bottom. This is so dark and heavy, and this is so flat and very, very bright, and I'd like to change that around. And you can see that all of these changes have been applied locally. You can see that by looking at the mask. Here's a levels adjustment to get closer to true black point in the image and moving a lot of pixels towards black. I come in and do a curves adjustment. Has an even more dramatic effect to setting a black point, particularly to the bottom part of the image. Here's the big dramatic change to the top part of the image. And then from here, you're really just going to see me work on more local contrast. And so I do that over the course of basically several curves layers that are applied locally. And then once I get to the point where I'm sort of liking what's happened to the local contrast on the ridges, a big dramatic change here that I'm applying to a lot of the image, and you're going to see the histogram move a lot more towards a white point overall in the image. And so this is where we started, and this is where we ended up in the black and white version. A very, very different image, where instead of sort of sitting back and looking out and kind of over the whole scene, we now can become more engaged and kind of move through the scene to different places and maybe slow down a little bit in the image. There are a couple of other things that I just wanted to say here at the end. One is that this image has a pretty strong sense of kind of moving in this direction in a lot of different ways. This power pole is higher than this one. The bird's flying in this direction. Even though this moves up, it comes down dramatically here. A lot of the clouds are moving down. And I could see the case for maybe skewing this side up a little bit to kind of create more of a bowl effect and maybe a little bit more of a balanced effect in that regard. This is just a variation that I thought about doing, and I've applied this in a very rough way to just show you what I'm talking about in terms of that left to right movement in the image. And it's made a big dramatic effect up here on the sky. The sky now is moving a lot more from right to left. And then the other thing that you could do here, if you wanted to go back to a little bit of color without making that color overwhelming and really flattening things out, is just colorize this at the end. You know, warm it up a little bit or cool it down a little bit, really sort of depending on maybe kind of an overall emotional feeling that you wanted the viewer to have, and colors, just a overlay of a little bit of warm or a little bit of cool can really do that in terms of the story that you're telling. A really beautiful image from Vincent. I love his framing from left to right. I love the use of the long lens, and it's not just a great moment, this great setting and stage. It's also really beautiful from a story standpoint. I just love the idea of the bird flying across and that suggestion of movement, and then the movement of energy or communication, and the idea of the power poles and the power lines in the image. I want to say a big thank you to Vincent for sharing this image with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique.